Welcome back to our channel, where every story carries a secret, a lesson, and a moment you'll never forget. Tonight, as the rain falls outside, let me tell you about the stranger who knocked on Daniel's door during the storm. The rain had been falling for hours, not the gentle kind of rain that people enjoy while sitting beside a warm window. This was different. The wind shook the trees violently. Thunder rolled across the dark sky, and every few seconds, lightning illuminated the empty road leading toward an old house at the edge of town. Inside that house lived a man named Daniel. He was 58 years old, quiet, and had spent most of his life trying to stay away from the memories of his past. That night, he was alone. He sat beside the window with a cup of coffee in his hands, listening to the rain hitting the glass. The clock on the wall showed 12:00 and Daniel looked at it. Then came the sound. Knock, knock, knock. He froze. Nobody came to his house at that hour, especially not during a storm like this. He waited. Nothing. Only the sound of rain. Daniel slowly stood up and walked toward the front door. He looked through the small glass window. There was nobody there. He opened the door. Cold wind rushed inside. The porch was completely empty, but something was lying on the ground, a black umbrella. Beside it was a small envelope. Daniel picked it up. His name was written on the front, Daniel. His hands became cold. He hadn't received a letter in years. He opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper. There were only 8 words. Whatever happens tonight, don't let anyone inside. Daniel stared at the sentence. He read it again, then again. Suddenly, knock, knock, knock. Daniel dropped the paper. Someone was standing outside. A woman's voice came through the door. Please, open the door. I'm freezing. Daniel stopped breathing for a moment. There was something familiar about that voice, something he hadn't heard in more than 20 years. He stepped closer. Who are you? Silence. Then the woman answered. Daniel, it's me. His heart began pounding. He knew that voice. It belonged to Emily, the woman he had loved when he was young, the woman who had disappeared from his life 23 years earlier. Daniel moved his hand toward the door handle. Then he remembered the letter. Don't let anyone inside. He pulled his hand away. Emily, he whispered. Yes. Daniel looked through the glass. The woman stood beneath the rain. Her face was partially hidden by the darkness. Where have you been? She didn't answer. Instead, she said, Daniel, please, we don't have much time. Daniel's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? I need you to trust me. He looked at the letter in his hand. Why should I? The woman remained silent for several seconds. Then she said something that made Daniel's blood run cold. Because the person who sent you that letter doesn't want you to know the truth. Lightning flashed across the sky. For a brief moment, Daniel saw the woman's face. It looked like Emily, but something wasn't right. Daniel stepped away from the door. How do you know about the letter? No answer. Emily. The woman suddenly stepped backward. Don't open the door. Daniel stared at her. You just asked me to open it. I know. Then what are you saying? The woman looked toward the road. I made a mistake coming here. Then she turned and disappeared into the rain. Daniel opened the door slightly. Emily, but she was gone. Only the black umbrella remained. Daniel picked it up. Inside the umbrella was something taped beneath the handle, a photograph. He removed it. It showed Daniel and Emily when they were young. They were standing beside a lake. Daniel remembered that day. It had been the happiest day of his life. But written on the back of the photograph were 4 words. You never knew everything. Daniel sat down. For the first time in years, memories he had tried to bury came rushing back. 23 years earlier, Daniel and Emily had planned to leave the town together. They were young. They had little money, but they believed they could build a life somewhere else. The night before they were supposed to leave, Emily called Daniel. Her voice sounded frightened. She told him she couldn't go. Daniel begged her to explain. She promised she would tell him everything the next morning. But the next morning, Emily was gone. Her family had moved away. Nobody knew where. Daniel spent months searching for her, then years. Eventually, he accepted the painful truth. She had left him. Or at least, that was what he believed. Until tonight, Daniel returned to the photograph. You never knew everything. He looked at the clock. Word 31 a.m. Then he heard something outside. A car engine. Daniel turned off the lights. Through the window, he saw headlights approaching the house. A dark car stopped near the gate. A man stepped out. He was carrying an old leather bag. Daniel didn't recognize him. The man walked toward the house, then stopped. He looked directly at Daniel's window. Daniel stepped away from the curtain. A few seconds later, knock, knock, knock. Daniel didn't move. The man outside spoke. Mr. Carter. Daniel remained silent. I know you're awake. Daniel's heart raced. Who are you? My name is Robert. What do you want? Robert looked toward the road. I came because of Emily. Daniel opened his mouth but said nothing. Robert continued. She asked me to give you something. What? The truth. Daniel looked at the letter again, then at the door. Why should I trust you? Robert sighed. Because I was the reason she disappeared. Silence filled the house. Daniel slowly approached the door, but he didn't open it. Explain. Robert lowered his head. 23 years ago, Emily discovered that her father had been hiding something from her. What? He had debts, serious debts, and people were threatening your family. Daniel frowned. My family? Robert nodded. They knew about your plans to leave town together. They knew where you were going. Emily's father was terrified that something would happen to you. Daniel's voice became quieter. So Emily left me to protect me. She was told that if she stayed with you, you would be put in danger. Daniel closed his eyes. All those years, he had believed she had simply abandoned him. Robert continued. But there was more. Daniel looked at him. What? Emily tried to contact you. When? Many times. Daniel shook his head. I never received anything. I know. Robert opened his leather bag. He removed a bundle of old letters. They were intercepted. Daniel stared at them. His hands trembled. Who intercepted them? Robert didn't answer immediately. Then he said, Emily's father. Daniel felt something break inside him. 23 years of anger. 23 years of unanswered questions. And suddenly, pieces of the past were falling into place. Where is Emily now? Robert looked at the ground. She's alive. Daniel's eyes widened. Where? She lives about 3 hours from here. Why didn't she come herself? Robert hesitated. Because she is afraid. Of what? Of losing you again. Daniel couldn't understand. Then why did she come tonight? Robert looked toward the dark road. Because she discovered something. What? Her father didn't destroy all the letters. Daniel stared at him. There was one letter he kept. Where is it? Robert slowly reached into the leather bag. But before he could answer, the lights in Daniel's house went out. Everything became dark. The storm outside grew louder. Robert stepped back from the door. Daniel, what? Don't open the door. Daniel froze. It was the exact sentence written on the letter. Then they heard a car approaching. Not Robert's car, another vehicle. It stopped at the gate. Robert whispered, They found us. Daniel's voice trembled. Who? Robert looked terrified. The people Emily's father owed money to. Daniel immediately understood. The letter hadn't been sent to scare him. It had been sent to warn him. The rain continued beating against the windows. Daniel and Robert remained silent in the darkness. A shadow moved outside. Then footsteps. Slow footsteps. Someone approached the front door. Daniel held his breath. The footsteps stopped. Nothing happened for several seconds. Then, a voice came from outside. Daniel. It was Emily. Daniel looked at Robert. Robert shook his head. Don't. Daniel whispered. But that's her voice. Robert answered. That's exactly why you can't. The voice came again. Daniel, please. Daniel moved toward the door. Robert grabbed his arm. Listen to me. Emily is not outside. Daniel stared at him. How do you know? Because I spoke to her 2 hours ago. Daniel's eyes widened. Robert whispered. She told me she would never come to your house tonight. The voice outside suddenly stopped. The storm continued. Then the footsteps disappeared. Minutes passed. Finally, the sound of a car leaving the property echoed through the rain. Daniel waited. Then Robert handed him the old letter. This is what Emily wanted you to have. Daniel opened it. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Emily's. The letter was dated 23 years earlier. Daniel read it slowly. She explained everything. She told him that she hadn't abandoned him. She had loved him. She had wanted to return, but she had been afraid that her family problems would destroy his life. She had spent years regretting that decision. And at the end of the letter, she had written, "If you're reading this, Daniel, it means I finally found the courage to tell you the truth." Daniel's eyes filled with tears, but there was one final sentence. "If you still want to see me, go to the old train station tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. Daniel looked at the clock. 3:46 a.m. He had 4 hours. The storm continued until dawn. Neither man slept. They sat quietly, listening to the rain. At exactly 7:30, the sky began to brighten. The rain became softer. Daniel stood at the window. For the first time in 23 years, he felt something he thought he had lost forever: hope. At 8 a.m., Daniel arrived at the old train station. The storm had finally ended. Water covered the platform. The clouds slowly opened, allowing sunlight to touch the wet ground. Daniel waited. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Then he saw her, an older woman walking slowly toward him. She stopped several feet away. Neither spoke. 23 years had passed, but Daniel knew her immediately. Emily smiled through her tears. "I'm sorry." Daniel looked at her. "I waited a long time to hear those words." She lowered her eyes. "I should have come sooner." Daniel took a slow breath. "Why didn't you?" Emily looked at the wet railway tracks. "Because I was afraid." Daniel smiled sadly. "So was I." They stood there in silence. Then Emily said, "I thought you hated me." Daniel shook his head. "I spent years trying to, and I never learned how." Emily smiled. For the first time in decades, they stood together again. Not as the young people they once were, but as two people who had survived years of misunderstanding, fear, and regret. Daniel looked back toward the dark clouds. The storm was gone, and suddenly he understood the message hidden inside that terrible night. Sometimes the biggest storms in our lives aren't caused by rain. They are caused by things we never say, by questions we never ask, by fears we allow to control us, and by stories we believe without knowing the truth. Daniel had spent 23 years believing that Emily had abandoned him, but the truth had been waiting all along. Not because it didn't matter, but because fear had kept both of them silent. That morning, as the first sunlight appeared over the station, Emily asked, "Do you think it's too late?" Daniel looked at her. Then he smiled. "No." He looked at the wet railway tracks one last time. "I think we're finally early," and they walked away together. The storm had passed, but Daniel knew he would never look at rain the same way again. Because sometimes, the storm doesn't come to destroy you. Sometimes, it comes to bring something back. Something you thought you had lost forever. And sometimes, the stranger knocking at your door isn't there to frighten you. Sometimes, they are carrying the truth you've been waiting your whole life to hear.